All right, a warm welcome, everyone. We'll just give people a couple of minutes to join before we get started. Good to see you. Thanks for signing up to this info session about the upcoming Nature Action Accelerator. So again, for those just joining, we're giving people a couple more minutes to join before we start, or a minute or so, not too long. Right. Yeah. All right, we have one more joining there. Okay. Again, good to see you. A warm welcome and good morning to everyone to this info session. Yeah, I should put this in the intro, in the presentation mode. All right. Again, a warm welcome to everyone joining this info session about the Nature Action Accelerator, which we at UN Global Compact Network Sweden will be running throughout the spring. In this info session, we'll talk a little bit about sort of the program, the practicalities around it. We will also be joined by Scott Cole, who's the one of the nature experts who will join us throughout the program. He will talk through a sort of the business case or sort of the why and what of a nature strategy, which should come in useful to you. And then we'll end the session with a Q&A session where we will ask you to ask your questions in the Q&A box. So, I mean, you can put it in the chat as well, but preferably in the Q&A box, just FYI. And should you have any sort of questions that come up throughout our presentations, just ask away. You don't have to wait until the end and the Q&A session. So just go post your questions as soon as they pop up. All right. I want to briefly introduce you to the It's Now for Nature campaign. The reason for that is that this accelerator program is to a large extent based on the campaign and the handbook they have developed. And I'll come into that shortly. To start with, the It's Now for Nature campaign it's a global campaign developed by the Business for Nature Coalition, which is a coalition of more than 100 influential partner organizations, including UN Global Compact, but also other organizations like the World Economic Forum, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and loads of other also smaller conservation organizations around the world. And the purpose of this campaign is to rally businesses and financial institutions to act and sort of work more credibly on nature by developing and publishing, as part of this campaign, a nature strategy on the nowfornature.org website. And the idea is to support the transition towards a nature positive economy and world overall through credible business action. And a key step of doing that is to actually have a credible nature strategy. And Scott will soon also talk more about the nature strategy. And a sort of a main component of this It's Now for Nature campaign is the Nature Strategy Handbook, which was developed in collaboration with PwC UK and with inputs from loads of different organizations and experts within the Business for Nature Coalition. And the handbook goes through sort of the step-by-step approach of setting up a nature strategy. What should a credible strategy include and look like? And that also forms the basis of this Nature Action Accelerator we will be running throughout the spring. Just quickly before Scott goes in again on the what and how, or sort of what and why of a nature strategy. This is sort of the approach or what a nature strategy should include as part of the It's Now for Nature campaign and based on the globally recognized handbook I just mentioned. And again, the idea of a strategy is to have sort of a structure, forward-looking plan that enables a company to sort of understand, but also act on the risks, dependencies, impacts, and opportunities related to nature. So sort of the basis is, of course, the materiality assessment. Again, to understand sort of dependencies, impacts, risk, and opportunities, or shortly DIROs. This is something you've probably already heard about, but it is also a key sort of component and step of the Nature Action Accelerator. So we will put quite a lot of time into sort of understanding and analyzing your company's dependencies, impacts, risk, and opportunities related to nature. A nature strategy should also include a nature ambition statement aligned with the global biodiversity framework to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 and to um, act and live in harmony with nature by 2050, which is sort of the overarching ambition of the global biodiversity framework. It should also include smart and science aligned targets that are linked to sort of your materiality assessment. And we have sort of frameworks like the Science-Based Targets Network and their guidance to support you in this. And of course, you should have an action plan in your strategy that sort of use the mitigation hierarchy when it comes to nature or avoiding sort of biodiversity loss, avoid, reduce, restore, regenerate, and transform. And an important part is, of course, also the governance component, and not least to have oversight on senior level, C-suite preferably, or even the board of a company. And then, of course, monitoring and evaluating and disclosing what you're doing on nature. And there will, in the program, we'll go through sort of frameworks like the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, TNFD. And this is sort of the base sort of or the foundation of a sort of credible nature strategy and something that will be sort of key components throughout the Nature Action Accelerator. All right, that's enough from me. I'm keen on listening in on Scott's presentation. Before I hand the mic over to you, Scott is the Senior Environmental Economist and Biodiversity Valuation Expert at WSP based in Sweden, working in sort of their global nature team. He will also be the nature expert throughout the Nature Action Accelerator. So it's a pleasure handing over to you, Scott, for a presentation on sort of the what and why of a nature strategy. The floor is yours.
Great, thanks. Albert, can you just give me a thumbs up that you see my screen as you should?
Now we do. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Albert, for inviting me over. Yeah, as he said, my name's Scott Cole. I work for WSP. I sit up in Östersund. I'm originally from the US. And the reason that I'm here is because Albert and I have been talking the last couple of months about how we can help companies move forward and develop these credible nature strategies, especially in this space, which is kind of complex. So together with my colleague, Jenny Merriman from the UK, who's not here today, we've put together a 6-month course. And we're not going to talk about exactly what's in the course. We're going to give you some idea. I'm going to really focus instead on the why, kind of why this is relevant today. So I often use this picture and this expression of a carbon tunnel to kind of capture this one-sided focus on carbon that a lot of companies and groups have had up until recently, when they started to shift and started to realize that we need to look outwards at other types of threats, including kind of looking at the entire biosphere instead of just the atmosphere. But what is it that we want to ensure here? What is it that we're really trying to aim at? And I think an important message here is that a functioning ecosystem provides a lot more than just climate regulation. It provides all these other types of benefits related to air quality, water quality, recreation, food, and protection against losses, right? And so a climate strategy is definitely a good idea, but it only addresses kind of one of these benefits. So a nature strategy is an even better idea. And a couple of reasons I wanted to talk about why it's interesting or of value to think a little broader than a climate strategy. The first answer is because we have lots of other environmental challenges. Climate is not the only one. And like I just noted, nature provides a lot of benefits, and companies contribute to these problems that you see on the screen, but they can also contribute to their solutions, right? Another risk with just having a focus on carbon is that you tend to measure things on a global level, and we kind of miss the fact that a lot of solutions are actually on a local level, right? So especially things like nature-based solutions, which are very smart in many different ways, but they don't arise naturally out of a carbon-only focus. They require broader thinking by companies. Another answer is if you're looking at the carbon sequestration goals, which a lot of companies and global frameworks have, they tend to place very high value on very simple ecosystems, ones that are good at eating up carbon really, really fast. But we may not necessarily want these types of biological deserts. We're actually more interested in restoring, or we should be more interested in restoring more diverse ecosystems. But restoration of those types often are penalized for not offering enough carbon, yet they're very important for resilience. And so it's kind of another reason to think a little bit broader in terms of a nature strategy. Another reason, kind of the obvious reason, is that these are connected, and you've surely heard people say this. I mean, from an adaptation point of view, maintaining diverse ecosystems is our strongest tool, right, against continuing change. So nature restoration helps us develop that buffer. But from a mitigation point of view, I think it's important to say that even if we do achieve our goal, even if we do reduce all the way down to where we need to be, we're still going to have this kind of residual warming. And so nature restoration is actually should also be seen as part of mitigation itself. So there's several reasons here to think a little bit wider in terms of nature. But what does nature mean? Based on the SBTN framework, they define nature as covering all activities that occur within these four different realms, right? Freshwater, land, marine, and atmosphere, where the climate is where we've been focusing most on that fourth bullet point. And I think it's important to say that biodiversity is kind of lying right at the intersection because it crosses all these different four realms. And it underpins these economic benefits that we depend on. It makes them possible. Biodiversity is like the pillar or the foundation that these ecosystem service benefits build on. So that's a little bit of background. There's just three things I wanted to cover today. What are the drivers? Why might you want to get into developing your own nature strategy? What's in a typical strategy, and what are other folks doing? So we'll start with the first question, why? One reason is because it might be required. If you're big enough, and you're based in the EU, you might have to do this. You might actually have to develop strategies with specific targets as required by CSRD. But another reason might be because you kind of have to do it, not because of the law, but because investors or other stakeholders are asking questions. So you might do this voluntarily. That is developing strategies with specific targets and progress toward them. But then there's kind of the underlying reason, even if there weren't rules for this and there weren't investors asking questions, you might do this because it's smart business, right? It's resilient companies are those that can kind of proactively manage risks and protect this long-term value. And I'm going to come back to that, but I also thought it was worth mentioning as a side note, sort of, even if nature strategies are relevant across all sectors, some branch groups, some organizations are actually committing their entire sector or branch to developing a nature strategy. And here's two examples. The ICMM, for those of you in the mining industry, and SBME, the Swedish group for building and construction materials. So it's worth noting that somebody might be forcing this upon you soon, depending on what sector you're in. But let's come back to that risk factor, risk being a major driver. I'm sure you guys have all seen this type of graph. We're losing species at an unprecedented rate. And this is kind of leading to this systematic risk. And this has been recognized by this World Economic Forum report every year that comes out about global risks. And last year, they said biodiversity and ecosystem loss was the third biggest risk. And now this year, they revised that up to be the second biggest risk. And what does that mean? And what is that built on? It's built on this finding that 50% of global GDP is dependent on nature and the ecosystem services that it provides. And there's lots of studies now that are starting to come out. I show two here from 2023 and 2024 showing a clear link between loss of biodiversity and invasive species, which are very costly, and loss of biodiversity and increased spread of disease, which is, as we all know, living through a pandemic, extremely costly. So this program, the Now for Nature program that Albert has mentioned, has developed a report that looks at these 5 major benefits associated with developing a nature strategy. Now strategies in general, if we take a step back, they're helpful and they're smart because they help to provide direction and avoid fragmented efforts when you're trying to address a challenge. They help you decide how to spend your limited resources. They make you accountable, etc. But I wanted to zoom in on just nature risks and take these one at a time. So If we zoom in on risk itself, as I've been mentioning here, it's a way of reducing risk. It helps to protect assets and secure supply chains being a very large source of risk today for many companies. But it also talks about risk in this sense could also mean access to financial markets, to your ability to grow as a company. And I wanted to lift this report that just came out literally a couple days ago from a major investor in Sweden, that essentially dug down into their portfolio to look at all these companies that they're giving money to and investing in, and saying which of these are exposed to nature-based risks. And they said, this is kind of an interesting quote as a result of this report: as investors, we can use this data to move beyond broad policies and pinpoint where value is at risk, and then we can start to have meaningful change and talk to specific companies. So this is interesting. Your investors are watching you, is essentially what this is saying, and they're digging into the data to see where the risks are. So it might be a good idea for you to kind of get ahead of that and figure out where those risks are. The second of 5 major reasons lifted by this report is resilience. Generating this long-term value is often done by ensuring healthy ecosystems, right? You can also have better employee retention and attraction. You're going to attract the highest talent, right? So there's a lot of reasons why a company would want to be resilient. Also a key driver. Reputation, of course, is also a big deal, to build trust with your stakeholders as their expectations continue to rise. Also to align with these global commitments. I could throw out a whole bunch of alphabet soup at you with SDGs and TNFD and so on, and Paris agreements. There's a lot of this international frameworks being developed, and it signals credibility and transparency if you align yourself with these. So another way to ensure a positive reputation. And then, of course, there's regulation. You want to avoid penalties. That's obvious. That can be costly. But also you might have to report on this stuff. That's another kind of regulatory driver. And I wanted to flag also for the idea that there's always future regulation, right? And one thing that's come to my attention recently in talking to clients and reading things is that this EU Restoration Directive is more than just a soft directive suggesting that member countries do things. It's actually has some quite strong liability clauses in there, that if you as a company are going to affect these specially designated areas that need to be recovered, these special habitat types, which is coming out in 2026, there could be some liability concerns. So I think that's also important to lift. And finally, revenue. These are not just developing a nature strategy has a cost, an upfront cost, but there's also some opportunities. You might actually identify new technologies or new products or new services. There are potential cost savings associated with nature-based solutions instead of conventional kind of hard gray solutions for addressing, for example, erosion or flooding. So there are lots of different reasons why it might actually lead to making money in the long run. Point 2 that I wanted to jump into: what might you find in a nature strategy? And Albert already showed this briefly. The main components, the way I see it, is that you have some kind of vision, where you want to be in many years. You have specific goals that are kind of like high-level outcomes that contribute to that vision. You have to have targets. You got to have numbers. You got to have a way of measuring that, and then you got to have your action plan. Those are the major components. And then there's also other important stuff. Who's going to do what within the group, within the company? Is the corporate office on board is a key question. How many resources, budget do you have to throw at this? The materiality assessment. What is risk? What are the risks you're facing, and what have you already done about it, and what more might you need to do? And then you want to monitor and report over time and engage your stakeholders and get better at it all the time. But these 4 points are really important. And they're so important that if you do decide to join this kind of pledge from the Now for Nature, and you want your nature strategy to be on their website as kind of a good strategy to look up to, a good example, you need to fulfill these 4 key aspects. We're going to go more into that during the course, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. But I was like, the second take-home message here is it's not easy. There's a lot of tools and methods and techniques that are evolving and being developed and being criticized and being improved. There's a lot of stuff out there, and that's kind of one of the main motivators for our course, is to say, what are all these tools? At what stage are we supposed to use these tools? Which tools are kind of screening to get us started and help us prioritize? And then what tools or data might we need to dig in deeper when we identify a prioritized area? Those are the kind of things we're going to try to address in our class or in our course. Last point number three, I just wanted to lift what other companies are doing. Albert sent me this last week, a report hot off the press from It's Now for Nature. What's going on out there, and it's highlights a bunch of trends from as of now. As of July, when they wrote the report, there were 30 companies that had published these robust nature strategies that had all these key components in it. That number's now gone up, and some of the key findings is that there's been a lot of corporate action, but is generally focused on land deforestation, pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. We need to do a lot more. We need to do it at scale. There's a handful of companies doing this well, doing this robustly, but those tend to be the exception rather than the rule. These robust, kind of broad nature strategies that address a lot of different risks. And then the report identifies a bunch of lessons learned from these 30 companies. And I don't have time to go through all of that, but I highly suggest you read it. It's very easy to read, easy to digest. This is one of the statistics that the report had was, hey, there's over 30 strategies today. And there's also up to 80 more companies that are working on strategies. And you can see on a map where these strategies are coming from. You can see there's one in Sweden. I'll tell you right now, that's OX2, the energy company. But then I went to their website, and that number 30 is now up to 37. And I think that the number of companies being engaged is going to be soon over 100, especially if we get 15 to 20 signed up for our course. So it's going in the right direction. I suggest you go to this website. It could be interesting to see what your competitors are doing. You can search what types of companies or what types of sectors have developed nature strategies. Just a final conclusion. There were a lot of conclusions in the report that are worth looking at, but I wanted to lift one of them here. Many businesses lack a clear understanding of their reliance on nature. They haven't done these robust materiality assessments. And when you don't have that assessment to build your nature strategy on, the strategy becomes a document without a lot of direction and a lot of force. So that's going to be a key area for our course as well, to focus on how to do a materiality assessment and how to take those results forward into specific targets, strategy, follow-up, and to get the buy-in from the corporate group. The report also lifts a couple things going forward. Some countries should probably prepare for some mandatory nature-related disclosure. TNFD is, of course, voluntary, but that is starting to change. Some countries are starting to require it. And aligning with the country's national biodiversity strategies, or NBSABs, kind of links to that next point about Nature Restoration Act. Countries are next year going to identify these are the areas that we need to be very careful about. And that's very useful information for companies to know about which areas they should be avoiding, and if they're going to invest in nature, where they might want to direct that investment. That's all I got. So yeah, if you're ready to click apply now, go for it. But if you still have a few more questions, I think that Albert's going to now address a couple more practical questions, and I'm also here for the next 30 minutes or so to address other kind of questions related to the content of the course. So yeah, Jenny and I look forward to meeting some of you if you decide to sign up. Thanks, Albert.
Thanks so much, Doc. This was super interesting and very useful, I think, for everyone. We already do have a question. We'll say that to the end, but you can have a look, Scott, if you want to. I think you might be interested in that one. So I'm just gonna share my screen. All right. So the Nature Action Accelerator, which is sort of a nature strategy accelerator, the purpose is to support companies with the skills and tools and know-how, and also the network throughout the program with other companies and experts to develop a credible nature strategy. And again, we do encourage companies to both develop and also publish a credible nature strategy in order to support transparency and also inspire others to do so. The goal is to equip the companies in the programs to conduct a materiality assessment, again, of the nature-related impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities, set smart targets aligned with these factors, set up a plan and also implement actions to achieve these targets, and to secure C-suite or board approval to deliver on this strategy. And of course, also to set the strategy up in the first place. So these are sort of some of the key components to if you want to publish your strategy as part of It's Now for Nature, as Scott also mentioned. a little bit sort of about the target audience or group for the program. In order to be eligible to attend the program or participate, you need to be a UN Global Compact participant company. And I think all of you on this call should be that. If not, let me know and we will look into it. But it's exclusively for UN Global Compact members in Sweden. Also to demonstrate strong desire to develop or if you already have a nature strategy or sort of, a strategic approach to nature at least, to improve your strategy or the strategic approach to nature. Um, Also, you need to have support from executive or C-suite leadership to attend the program also, and with sort of that buy-in to actually develop a strategy, which is of course important as the program is aimed at supporting you in that process. And just to clarify, the idea is not for you to sort of develop the strategy throughout the program. You might be doing that along the program, but the idea is to equip you with sort of skills and know-how and tools to do so afterwards. You also need to appoint one representative to participate throughout the whole program, and attend all sessions and so on, all the mandatory sessions, that is. We will have some sort of non-mandatory things going on as well. But we also encourage you to bring a colleague, and that might be the same colleague throughout the program, but perhaps preferably sort of different colleagues depending on sort of what the topic of the workshop will be, for instance. But one sort of representative should attend the full program, FYI. All right, a little bit about the format of the program. Sorry, a lot of text here, but we'll sort of share the slides afterwards as well, so this might come in handy anyway. The program will run between February, sort of early February till late May. And we'll do it in a semi-digital format, which means that we will have at least two in-person meetings. And that will be the first one, sort of the kickoff, which will be sort of 2 days, most likely in Gothenburg. And the second one will be sort of the wrap-up one in Stockholm, most likely. But there will be in person in Sweden at least. And again, this will be sort of from early February to late May. In between those sessions, we will do a set of digital workshops and office hours and so on, and also other opportunities to engage. We will also have an online forum where we'll sort of upload all the key assets and tools and recordings of stuff and so on. And you will also be able to sort of chat with participants and of course also ask questions to the experts like Scott and Jenny throughout the program. But sort of we see this as sort of a program of 3 stages. The first one is of course the introduction part. We will have a program onboarding from sort of mid to end January, where we'll sort of support you in accessing the digital platform, also access the key materials like a workbook, for instance, and so on. We will also, as part of this, do a readiness assessment of your company, and sort of you will do that, but with support from us. That would be sort of, an exercise, both sort of at the first workshop, but that will also form the sort of foundation for the rest of the program. So that will be a key component that you will do at the beginning of the program, but of course with support from us. And again, we'll do the in-person introduction workshop 2 days in Gothenburg, in Gothenburg or Stockholm, 4th and 5th of February. So could be good to note that down already. And we have tried to avoid sort of, different school breaks and so on throughout the spring as much as possible. Stage 2 is sort of, the big chunk in between the first and last in-person meetings, what we call the Act D coaching, and that's based on the sort of the Act, Commit, Transform, and Disclose steps as proposed by the Nature Strategy Handbook. And these will be mainly digital workshops where we'll sort of dive into these different steps, and they will be pretty hands-on. So you will not listen in on a sort of 3-hour presentation or something like that. We'll do it quite interactively. And we will also offer digital office hours throughout the spring where you as participants can log in and ask questions and discuss challenges and so on, both with the experts in the program, but also with your peers. So I think these will come in very handy or useful as you go through the program. Then finally, stage three, consolidation and wrap up. Again, we'll do a one in-person workshop, 2 days, again in Stockholm and Gothenburg, but that will be 19th and 20th of May. And then, of course, sort of after the program, we will, as much as possible, continue to that sort of alumni engagement with you and support you as much as we can. And also, not least, that you can stay connected with your peers throughout the program. Some important information and sort of not least about the application process. As you know, the application is open and will stay so until Monday, this 15th of December. But we are sort of screening and accepting applicants on an ongoing basis, and we will have a maximum of 16 companies joining to have sort of, a sort of large and small enough cohort. So that's the maximum number of companies we will accept. We have a few applications in already. An application does not mean being accepted automatically, just FYI. It depends a little bit on sort of where you're at sort of the maturity level, and also if you are sort of prepared to go through the program as we intend. You can always ask questions and so on by emailing me. And of course, we have this info session, so please ask your questions here as well. But again, it's not first come, first serve, but we will screen and accept applicants as we go. So if we hit that sort of maximum of 16 companies before 15th of December, we'll sort of close it down a little bit before, just FYI. And we will let you know if you've been accepted or not, no later than before the Christmas holiday, so that same week of the 15th of December. And the application process is two-step. You start your application through the application form, which is pretty simple on the globalcompact.se website. I'll put the link here as well. You find it under sort of utbildningsprogram, so educational programs. So when you have submitted your application there, you will get an automatic email with another sort of link to another survey you need to fill out and submit in order to complete your application. So remember that you need to do both these steps in order to submit the full and final application to the program. And also, as you can see, there's a 10,000 Swedish kronor fee. We see it as sort of a commitment fee. That it is very important that all of you, sort of all the participants, participate throughout the whole program, not least for that sort of peer exchange component. So we do have a commitment fee, which will also support, of course, us running the program. This program has been developed from scratch, more or less, here in Sweden, by us in the Young Global Compact Network Sweden. And that's also why we do have this commitment fee of 10,000 kronor, just FYI. Again, you can sort of learn more and read about the program, some FAQs as well, and most importantly, apply at our website on our website, globalcompact.se. All right, we do have time now to address your questions. And again, please write your questions in the Q&A box. And I see we have a couple of questions already. I'll soon stop sharing my screen. We will also afterwards be sharing sort of the slides with you in a follow-up email, just FYI. And should you have sort of any questions coming up after this info session, you can email me at albert.askerljung@globalcompact.se. All right, with that said, I'll stop sharing my presentation and look through the Q&A. And I know we have Scott here as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I see a couple of questions that are kind of to you, some practical questions. The
yeah,
first question that came up was actually a little more content oriented. Maybe I'll take a stab at that, and maybe you can
yeah,
think
go
about the
ahead.
answers for those other ones. So the question came in here from an anonymous attendee. We conducted the double materiality assessment, and both biodiversity and nature come out as immaterial. Should we still develop a nature strategy? And how to convince governance body to do so when we don't have any materiality on the topic. Good question. So indeed, by definition, if you say something is not material, then that means there's little to no risk, and so yeah, I guess you don't need to do anything about it. So that would be the short answer. But I have a couple follow-up questions. Was this just a screening analysis, like you just kind of high-level screening tools, like for example the WWF risk screening tool, to decide whether something was material or not? Because if it was kind of high level, you might miss some things. That's one first reaction. Um, and then another reaction is, of course, I don't know your business model. You're anonymous, but it could be a super environmentally friendly business model. But it's hard for me to believe if you're kind of out there manufacturing something and you're reliant on a supply chain that might come from metals or other kinds of things that need to get mined out of the ground. It would be hard for me to see how a double materiality assessment that looks at both direct impacts and indirect impacts through your supply chain, either consumers or your suppliers, it would be hard for me to see how you could say that there's no impact whatsoever on either biodiversity or nature. Again, it could be possible, but if you're generally speaking, if you're very high up on the value chain, you're producing something by putting a bunch of stuff together, then your materiality is likely to be in your supply chain. You may just have a factory where you put pieces together and you may not have a huge impact on biodiversity from that direct activity. But if you're dependent on a supply chain that goes way down deep into the ground, digging up stuff, then there's a good chance that you have your materiality there. Um, so that's another reaction. But also, I might just say that two other things. You remember that circle that I showed? There were 5 different reasons for developing a nature strategy, and one of them was risk. And so you're addressing risk through a materiality assessment. There's still those other 4 reasons why you might want to consider doing a nature strategy, such as resilience. I'm reading now from the circle, reputation, regulation threats that might be coming or that exist today, and revenue possibility, creating new opportunities. One last point on that question, because it's a really good question. You may want to do this anyway because there might be synergies with other strategies you already have in place. So, for example, Volvo has a really good example where they have a circularity strategy to reuse material and stop mining virgin material. And so they have that already in place. And then they start to look at biodiversity and they say, oh, well, let's see, if we stop mining virgin material and we're recycling it, that actually has a synergetic positive effect on biodiversity also, because we're not going and digging stuff out of the ground, especially the materials on the high impact commodity list, which suggests impacts on biodiversity. So you have the possibility of finding synergies. And that's just one example that I give. So hopefully that answer helped.
Thanks, Scott.
Please, please throw follow-up questions in there if you have any.
Brilliant. Thanks, Scott. And yeah, just to add also to that, perhaps, is that many companies do not, now we speak of sort of a nature strategy as sort of a standalone strategy, but it could be integrated in sort of an overall sustainability or even sort of, a climate and nature strategy, for instance. So it doesn't have to be sort of, a standalone strategy on its own. Perhaps it's even better to sort of integrate it, depending on the company and so on. But just FYI. We have some other questions. I'll address sort of more of the practical ones. When during the day will the office hours be scheduled? That's a very good question. We have in sort of intentionally not sort of scheduled those yet. We'll sort of accommodate different time zones as much as possible. As we know, some companies who have sort of indicated interest or have already applied to the program might have colleagues, for instance, based in the United States and so on. So we'll try to accommodate that as much as possible when we find sort of set up the specific timings of the day. So
I might just
yeah.
jump in briefly. Albert, on that, we were in developing these office hours, we're thinking of bringing in some of our WSP global experts, and some of those sit
Exactly.
in Canada and the USA. So another
Exactly.
reason for us to perhaps do it later in the afternoon, European time.
Yeah, so we already thought of that. But then, of course, if you have, for instance, I don't know, colleagues based in Australia or New Zealand, it might be difficult to join. But hopefully, we'll try to accommodate again as much as we possibly can. Yes, on the fee, that's a very good question. I alluded to it previously in the presentation. The main reason for having that fee is a commitment fee to participate throughout the program. This is based on the experiences of other similar programs we have done ourselves, but also other similar nature action and nature strategy accelerators around the world. But also, this is the first major education or accelerator program we are developing from scratch here in our network. Our other similar accelerators are usually developed by UN Global Compact corporately, and supported also through corporately, and they are our some of our flagship programs. So that's why we have this fee. And related to that, to have a fee based on the company size, that's a very good question as well. We have landed in a fee that we hope and believe is well balanced, and that should not be too much of a threshold for smaller companies as well. I know that might not be the case. We were looking into having differentiated fees, but ended up having this smaller generic fee for the program. But I appreciate the question, also the suggestion as well. And also, don't hesitate to email me or call me, of course, if you want to talk about it in more detail. All right, maybe this one frame or define biodiversity. For example, should we be a nature strategy or biodiversity strategy? Maybe Scott, you would be interested in this. I can just start off by saying that we are using this broader concept of nature, biodiversity being a key component of that, as Scott also alluded to. But we want this broader approach, as there are issues or challenges or risks not related directly to biodiversity as such. So we would recommend doing a broader approach to nature and not only focusing in solely on biodiversity. But I think it depends a lot, of course, on the company, what type of company you are, and so on, which sector you're operating in. But Scott, over to you.
Yeah, really good question. I guess I like Albert's answer. Nature is a little bit broader than biodiversity, but they're pretty darn similar. If you think about that figure I showed with the four different circles, and so in the middle is where biodiversity intersects with these. And the point I was trying to make is that biodiversity kind of is relevant for all four realms of nature. So a nature strategy must address biodiversity, and a biodiversity strategy must address those four components. So in a sense, it's kind of the same thing. I also might just point out, maybe in your company, with your narrative, with your investors, with the pressures on your company, maybe you have a reason for choosing one word or the other, and that's fine. But I would suggest that they are pretty much the same thing. One little example: land use change is often lifted as kind of the number one driver for biodiversity loss. But land use change is a huge driver for all kinds of nature-related losses that are not just biodiversity. You could imagine land use change that's kind of in this everyday landscape that's not affecting these specially designated biodiversity areas, but they still have an impact on air quality, climate, water quality, species, but maybe not super high sensitive biodiversity areas. So I guess that would lean me toward choosing the word nature if you could. If you're kind of within the constraints of your organization, it's better to think nature. But if you were kind of forced to use the word biodiversity, you can do that, and it can still be a wide, inclusive nature strategy in the end.
Thanks, Scott. And yeah, I think some of the companies that have submitted to the Snow for Nature campaign, for instance, banned it as a biodiversity strategy. But as you say, they do address similar or the same risks and opportunities and so on. So thanks for that also, Scott. I did sort of get the question also that I replied to in writing from Anne about if I will share the presentation afterwards. And yes, I'll send a follow-up email with the presentation. So you get that either sort of later today or no later than tomorrow. And yeah, can both me and my colleague attend all meetings and webinars if we like? Yes, you can. We will do a we do open for two participants from each company for both sort of in-person and digital sessions. For digital sessions, you could also, especially sort of the office hours, I would say you can join sort of, if you have sort of a specialized colleague in a different sort of function. I don't know, finance, for instance. You could bring that colleague to tag along. But yes, you can be two people from the company joining all sessions and so on, but at least one. That's the thing. But good question. And again, to be super clear, both for the physical sort of in-person ones and the digital ones. All right. What sort of companies will you be prioritizing in the program? That's a great question. We are intentionally not doing, we will do sort of a sector agnostic program. So we will invite sort of any company from any sector really, sort of who are or that is a UN Global Compact member or participant can sort of apply and could join the program. Um, we will not prioritize consultancies, and that's sort of, I think that's mainly for, we will sort of focus on the more real economy companies at this stage. And also as we sort of we really sort of we believe those companies will benefit the most from this program. So for instance, we would not accept WSP probably to the program, just FYI. But otherwise, sort of, there will be companies. We are also, of course, accepting financial institutions like banks and so on to join, and that's sort of the purpose of the program, to support these sort of real economy and financial institutions companies
And
to join. Scott, go ahead.
yeah, Albert, you've also mentioned we have talked about this in some preliminary meetings, and yeah, we thought about whether there might be a cohort that kind of focused toward a particular sector. We have no control over that. That might happen, and if so, we'll do the best we can to kind of focus on that sector. But as Albert has pointed out, there's often really interesting peer learnings that can occur across sectors also.
Mm.
So there's benefits of not making it too specific, I would suggest. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't know yet sort of what the final cohort will be. So it might be, as you say also, Scott, that we have sort of, an overweight of a certain sector and so on, but anyone sort of applying to this program will benefit from it. But I mean, if you have peers from the same sector, that will be great, of course. But I strongly believe, sort of based on our previous experiences running other programs, sort of that sector agnostic approach really works well. And to, get new ideas and input that you might not have thought about before. All right, that was the last question I can see now. Oh, we got one. All right, from Anna. Let me just quickly read.
It's ISO standards. Ah, yes. Yeah, that did just come out, didn't it?
Yeah,
National
exactly.
standard.
Yeah, that as Scott mentioned, it just came out. It's very new, but we will sort of cover sort of the established sort of, different frameworks and tools and guidance out there. We'll look into this for sure. We haven't sort of, as this is very new, we haven't sort of decided sort of to the extent we'll sort of highlight this. We will certainly sort of make use of, for instance, TNFD's guidance, SBTN, and so on, sort of, the sort of globally recognized and established sort of frameworks and guidance out there. But I'm sure we'll sort of, look into this and sort of use this somehow in the program. And then the idea is not to sort of, equip you to go into the nitty-gritty of each of these different sort of guidance and network. We will highlight different sort of tools and guidance that's out there and that might be useful for you in this process. But we might not go into sort of the very detailed aspects of these. So for instance, for an example, we in sort of, analyzing your impacts and dependencies on nature or biodiversity rather, we will highlight, for instance, the WWF risk filters on biodiversity and water, for instance. So we'll look into different tools and so on, but it's a very good question. Again, it's very new, and also to let you know that this sort of ISO or ISO standard is sort of very much aligned with other sort of, frameworks and standards, not least drawing a lot from TNFD. So even if we don't go into too much detail on the ISO standard, it will cover more or less the same. So they are very much aligned, and that's which is great, of course. And we will not be sort of, favoring any sort of, tools or frameworks. We'll sort of, bring up sort of the commonalities as well. But Scott, I'm not sure if you want to perhaps chime in.
I was just going to say that that last thing that you just said, that I think there was a TNFD person that was quoted in the news release for this ISO
Yeah.
standard. So there is some clear overlap and synergies.
Yeah.
And we
No,
will definitely go into
absolutely.
TNFD.
Yeah, but great question, Anna, and I hope that answered your question. But again, please let us know otherwise. All right. Now I can't see any more questions as of now. Maybe I'll just speak over for a minute or so if you have more questions, just to again highlight some of the key aspects of the program that you need to think of now, or sort of the application process. The absolute latest date to apply or submit your application is the 15th of December, and that is the full application, which means sort of the first step on our website, globalcompact.se, where you'll submit the initial sort of application form. And then it's very important by the 15th of December latest also to submit that second part, which is sort of this survey for us to understand sort of what sort of your level of maturity as a company, and sort of where you stand today, if you will be sort of ready to take on this program. So important to do that. And again, we will screen and accept applicants on an ongoing basis. So I would say do not wait to the last minute. If you really want the spot, there might be sort of filling up before the 15th of December. So if you're interested in applying, which I really hope you are, especially after this presentation from Scott and so on, to apply as soon as possible. And again, should you have any questions that come up later, don't hesitate to email me, and I'll address these as soon as I possibly can. Scott, anything from you before we?
Yeah, two quick things. One, I've lived in Sweden for 20 years. I speak Swedish, so if you were to sign up, you can always feel comfortable asking questions in Swedish. That shouldn't be a restriction, or shouldn't make you reluctant to sign up. Number two, please share this with others. You probably have some others in your own sector or others outside of your sector that you think might find this interesting. So please send it along. And Albert, you can tell them what they can send. They can obviously send the HTML link that shows you how to sign up. Is it going
Yeah.
to be possible to share this info session, or
Yeah.
these
So
slides can also be shared, as far as I'm concerned, to
yeah.
people that are within the UNGC network?
Yeah, so that's a great sort of suggestion also, Scott. And I've already sort of had companies that ask if they can sort of share it with, for instance, if they have big suppliers or something like that. And again, the
Mm-hmm.
program is open to sort of both large and smaller companies. So we'll have a mixed cohort. So it might be sort of, a smaller company, for instance, that you think would benefit from this. But yes, my suggestion is that you first and foremost share the website link where we have most of the key information. But I will also share this presentation slides again later today or tomorrow latest, and you can send those through as well. And should they have sort of any follow-up questions or anything, I'm happy to share sort of this info session recording, but they are also most welcome to send me an email as well. And thanks also, Scott. We will run this program, as you probably sort of understand by now, in English to sort of we have a lot of participant companies who are sort of have colleagues from across the world, so that's why. But again, Scott, you are Swedish as well, so you'll be able to answer questions in Swedish and so on. Perfect. Thank you so much for joining this info session. I hope we addressed your questions, but again, don't hesitate to reach out should you wonder anything else. Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.